I'm Damien Fowler.
And I'm Eileen Liffring.
And welcome to Season 9 of the current podcast.
And we're kicking off this new season with Jennifer Brace, Chief Futurist at Ford.
Now, Jennifer has deep roots at Ford. Not only did her father work for the company, but she started working there 20 years ago, first as an engineer.
Now her days are filled with keeping an eye on all things that could impact Ford's business in the future. Everything from AI to the latest consumer trends. Her team is often keeping track of 4 different futures at once. We started by asking Jennifer about her title, Chief Futurist.
I'll be honest with you and tell you that apparently my futuring skills were not intact when I started working for Ford, because I would have never expected to be in such a role. That being said, what I do as the Chief Futurist is I spend a lot of time paying attention to trends and signals, paying attention to the categories that we refer to as STEEP, meaning social, technological, economic, environmental, and political. You'll notice I did not mention automotive. That is also by design. And what I like to think of my job is paying attention to all the things that are happening outside of automotive that might come back and impact our business or the environment that we have to operate within. So I actually never say that I predict the future. I say instead I help teams prepare for the future. Contrary to the title of futurist, I can't actually see the future. I wish I could. Mm-hmm. I was disappointed when I found out the job did not come with a crystal ball that worked or anything like that.
You say that does not include automotive by design, you say. Why is that?
Well, the truth is there's a ton of experts in the automotive space within this company, and I'm happy to lean on them for their expertise and understanding whether it be the future of, engine propulsion systems or battery technology and things like that. I let them kind of own that space. And when I want to know more about it, I can talk to them about what they're seeing and how they continue to see it evolve. So a lot of what I do, I like to say that part of our job is to connect the dots. So by connect the dots, I mean, if we're seeing something happening maybe in education, if we're seeing something happening in mental health, what my job would be to do and my team is we're going to take some time and we're going to say, okay, if we're seeing this happen over here, can we connect the dots to get it to a point where it might come back and impact our business and might come back and impact our products, our services, the environment that we're operating within? So a lot of the times we're starting at the very high level. Then we talk about how it could impact the market. And then we get to how it could impact Ford or a specific product, depending on what work we're doing at the time.
One of the questions, just based on what you just said, you're sort of looking at current trends, but then how do you kind of extrapolate from those current trends? And what's the kind of chronology of that? Are you looking out a year, 2 years?
So the answer is yes, in terms of timeframes. We do look at an array of timeframes, and I would think of the 1-year timeframe as a much clearer than, say, the 5 or 10-year timeframe. So, of course, the farther out you go, the more kind of opportunity that the trend could shift or change. So when we're looking at trends, often what we're doing is, number one, we have to take data that we see today. But we'll go back and we'll try to understand whether the trend has momentum. We'll look for other signals to help us start to quantify that trend. For example, if you're understanding where venture capital dollars are being spent, or even how many times a term is brought up in earnings calls, something like that. So when we're thinking of trends, we're always trying to add some of that data element to make sure that we're proving to ourselves that we're taking it through some checks and gateways to ensure that we do believe it's a trend that has some staying power. And then the other side of that, when we're thinking about how the future might be different, I think of the trends as the things that we feel confident in. Things that we quote unquote know or we expect to continue moving forward. But the other half of that are the things that we don't know. And that's what we would call uncertainties. And those uncertainties are duly named because they could go in any direction, and we don't pretend to know what direction those might go in. So we look at both trends and uncertainties to consider how different futures might play out.
That's fascinating. And how, given all those different scenarios, do you determine which of the scenarios are the kind of headline scenarios? I mean, I know that you talk about different futures. Do you winnow it down to a specific number of futures?
Yeah. So usually the way we tend to do it, if we like doing a 4 future matrix, if you will, if you take 2 critical uncertainties, typically we would pick, depending on the problem, we will pick whatever uncertainties we feel are the most impactful. So with the state of EVs, for example, we might look at the regulatory landscape might be one of those where it could become, more stringent or less for that matter. And then we might take another axis, something say like maybe social acceptance of EVs. How's the public feeling about it? It's kind of a mix of art and science, if you will.
Do you find that you're ever surprised by something that's gone away?
Yeah, it is a constant kind of moving beast, if you will, in terms of where we see momentum and energy. It's rare, to be honest with you, for us to consider something a trend. We take it through several gateways. So it's rare that it goes away completely if it's something that we've considered a trend. I'm calling it out that way because the way that my team works, we're very scientific with what we consider to be a trend, something that has gone through a lot of gateways for us to believe that it's got lasting power versus something that would be a signal. Now, a signal, we don't know what way it's going to go. We don't know if it's got lasting power yet. So it's the type of thing that we would start tracking because it's a signal and we'd want to be paying attention to it. But the signals don't always grow up to be fully fledged trends.
That's really interesting. I mean, especially when the culmination of all those trends become like 4 different futures, which is a lot of futures.
It's a lot to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. A lot to look at once.
We get that feedback sometimes from teams that they're like, but can't we just pick one? Why do we have to think about 4?
Yeah, and when you say you guys don't predict, but you prepare, can you explain the difference a little bit?
So when it comes to predicting, that is saying that we can see the future and this is what it looks like. And the truth is nobody really has that power. And that's why we say that we help people prepare, because the truth is if you've made a prediction and you're wrong and one of these uncertainties comes up and changes the game, you've put all your eggs in one basket and you're in trouble. I like to say that COVID made our job a lot easier in trying to convince people that betting on a single future could be dangerous. That is when we're asking teams to be prepared for the future by considering more than one scenario. What we're asking you to do is to kind of recognize where your blind spots might be in your current strategy and how you might pivot if you need to. So it can be used in product and in different parts of the business and of course, also in marketing. A lot of what we're doing when it comes to the marketing side is trying to understand consumer sentiment. So where are people? How are they feeling? What are their needs? How are their needs or sentiments shifting? We'll do things like trying to understand how people feel about technology. Like AI is a great example that we've been talking about quite a bit in the last year or so, and how people are feeling about it, and understanding where people are at and how we might see that evolving helps us within marketing to understand how consumers might be willing to accept a technology, how they expect it to work into their lives, or what they expect out of the brands and the companies that are using a technology, how they expect to hear about it, understand its use, all of those things. So it's understanding where consumers are at. All of that becomes useful information from a marketing side as we're trying to communicate and connect with our consumers and of course, trying to develop new products and services to meet their needs.
Now, you mentioned COVID and the impact that had. And who could have predicted that one? I don't know. Maybe you guys did. Maybe you knew it was coming up.
Some will say there were lots of warnings. World Health Organization, CDC, were certainly warning everybody that pandemics were on the way with how connected we were as a society and how we had seen some signals. The truth is that we saw signals before that. There was MERS, there was SARS, Ebola. So there were some signals, but most would agree that we didn't necessarily take them seriously enough to be prepared. COVID jolted us so much because it was this thing that we all, even though we had, and maybe just my team, but I think a lot of people would have said, oh, right, I remember that. Oh, I remember that there were some other epidemic type things that were talked about, but it didn't hit me directly. So I didn't think about it. But if you really go back, the signals were there. But I'm not making any predictions on what the next big kind of black swan event will be.
Are there any other, would you say, micro or macro, perhaps, trends that brands should be paying attention to?
There's a lot of things that are happening that that we all need to be paying attention to. AI, we can't stop talking about it, right? It's bringing up a lot of questions, I should say, in terms of the way that we operate, the way that we work, the way that we interact and engage with our services, our everything that's around us. The other thing that is very highly connected to that would be trust. And how are people building trust? How are they gaining trust? Do they believe the information that they get? Where is the trusted source of information? What we are certainly seeing from a high level is that people trust those around them. They build a trusted circle of friends and family. That's the number one trusted element in their life is their friends and family. And we continue to see, trust in institutions going down. We are seeing some increases in trust in businesses, but even that has some ebbs and flows, big business versus small business, or tech company versus something else. I think there's a lot to be said about how people are feeling in general when it comes to mental health and wellness. That continues to be a huge, huge topic. And we do see differences in generations. So we see our younger generations being more likely to say that they have mental health as a stressor. They have more anxiety. They feel lonely more often than our older generations. The other thing I would say, talking about our older generations, is understanding how they're living. Our boomers are in retirement, but are they really retiring? They're staying super active. They are kind of redefining their golden years, if you will.
That's really interesting. As a Gen Xer, I feel like, I used to be the youthful generation, but that suddenly caught up with me, which brings me to my point, which is like the future is now in lots of ways. And what I mean by that is, are there predictions that you have talked about from 5 years ago that are now being realized, as it were, in real time? So you can say, chalk that one up to success.
I would say a few years ago, we were talking quite a bit about divisiveness growing in our country and how that might come into play, but lots of different things with respect to technology and how we see the technologies in our lives starting to grow and play a part. I smile a little bit when I say that, because I feel like a lot of the conversations I'm in this year, people are talking about AI like it's this brand new thing that we've never heard of before, and we're suddenly inundated with it. But we've been talking about it for a long time. And even back in 2019, when we asked people about AI, like they were reporting that they didn't understand it, or that they were afraid of it and what it could be and what it could do. We expected that it would continue having a large role in people's lives. And we have certainly seen that grow, and more recently kind of rocket and take off, if you will, as generative AI has taken hold.
So yeah, it seems like you guys knew all along.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to claim that, but
Don't be modest.
Don't be modest.
We talk about AI, but if you had to sort of pick some other hot topics, as it were, that Ford is not necessarily hot, maybe they're not hot yet, but maybe they will get hot. But if you had to pick some that Ford is looking at when analyzing these possible futures, are there any in your, on your dashboard, if I can use an automotive metaphor, that, you're really focused on?
I would say topics that we continue to explore, right? When it comes to several years ago, autonomous driving was kind of a big topic that we talked about a lot. And we've seen that evolve a bit, right? So where we're focused more on assistance features, continuing to help make the drive easier for a driver without necessarily being able to do this full autonomous future where we're taking them from, the door of their house to the door of their work without them having to lift a finger. So we're not there yet. When it comes to technologies, though, so the supportive technologies there, we continue to investigate, and we continue to look for ways to make it easier for consumers. So leaning into that.
Do you feel, though, that technology overall has kind of caught up with the forward-thinking nature of your job?
I mean, absolutely. The good and bad, right, about technology is that it continues to evolve, and it feels like it's moving faster every day. Often what we say is it's hard to imagine unimaginable tech because in 10 or 15 years, if we think of technology as being 1,000 times stronger or better than it is today, the easiest way we would look for signals. Years ago, talking robot sounded kind of weird. And now we see examples of that
Yeah.
all over the place, right?
That's
when we
true.
think about AI and chatbots and whatnot. So if I see something that sounds a little bit weird, to try to like squash my immediate reaction of, oh, that's crazy. Oh, that'll never happen. And instead lean into it and try to understand it and say, well, what happened? What would it be like if that became a thing?
Yeah. You spoke to me briefly for your profile, which is on thecurrent.com. And you were telling me a little bit about how AI could eventually work its way into the overall like car experience, especially for like on the consumer side.
Yeah, sure. So, we're not talking about anything specific when it comes to the technology in our cars, but thinking about it in terms of what we see happening outside of the car and how that might change the experience. I think the really kind of obvious, easy application is with the way that you are interacting with your car, with if you're asking it to do something, being able to have a more natural two-way conversation, and in a lot of ways, anticipate some of the things that you might need. For example, if you are up going into the office and let's say you're up an hour earlier than usual or something like that, wouldn't it be great if your car said, hey, would you like me to order, the venti at Starbucks instead of your usual grande? You're up early today. Creating a relationship and having it feel like it's almost your friend helping you along, understanding what you need. And as technologies improve, that is the type of thing I would expect to be able to have a stronger relationship and for the car to be able to understand not only what you're asking of it, but also to even anticipate what your needs might be as it learns your habits and behaviors and starts to get smarter.
Something just occurred to me, I know you're focused on an automotive kind of scenario, but do you think about digital advertising and where that's going to? Is that something that intersects with what you think?
There's a lot of questions happening with respect to AI. I think digital advertising is a fascinating space. If we think about ways that AI might help content creation easier, I would also expect that it would make it easier to connect with specific consumers and understanding what they need or what might resonate with them, understanding, kind of where they're at, whether it be kind of physically where they're at or even like mentally what space they're in. As we get better understanding of that, I would expect that AI should be able to help with that.
Now, you weren't always a futurist or even a marketer. You actually come from a background of engineering. Why did you move into the marketing side of things? And how would you say your engineering background has really helped you in your marketing positions at Ford?
I would say it was not an expected career move. If I'm honest, it was an opportunity that came up when I was in engineering. I spent a lot of time working on our in-vehicle technology, on our sync systems. And this was at a time when I joke we used to always carry like Garmin systems, like navigation systems in a bag. We were carrying them into our cars at the time when I started working on putting a touchscreen directly in the car and having all of those controls kind of in one spot. I ended up working with our marketing team quite a bit to help them with the communications, both to train our dealers and our customers for how to do these things that were all new at the time. So that was kind of when I got my feet wet with marketing, was more helping them because I understood the technical side. But as I've moved into the marketing organization and understood more about the ways that it is utilized and that it comes into the process, it is super helpful to have a background of understanding the engineering side of the work. And I can help to bring that knowledge into the conversation. Sometimes it's just as simple as, oh, if we're going and talking to the engineers, let's make sure that we've got data to back up all of these things that we're saying because, that will get them bought in to what we're saying. They don't want to hear a pretty story. They want to see the data.
When I was growing up, I remember I had this book called The Science in Science Fiction, and it explained why certain things were possible in science fiction films. For instance, you can't see lasers in space. All right, there was a disappointment to me when I read that. But my question is, you look at the science, and you also think about the future. So I'm wondering if you read a lot of science fiction, if you kind of, those two things kind of work for you.
Yeah, sometimes. So I do less of the reading. Sometimes I will watch it more just because usually, honestly, like TV and media, they do a great job of pushing our thinking. Like Black Mirror, for
Oh, yeah.
example.
It's a great one.
Right? That's a great one. It's kind of often it's like these cautionary tales, but they really do a good job of taking something that we see today and pushing it into the future and forcing us to think about how that might happen.
Obviously, new technology is great and can be helpful, but there can also be, like Black Mirror has shown us, some very terrible things that can happen because of those such great technology. As a futurist, my question to you is, what keeps you up at night?
Where do we begin? Right now, I think we are on the cusp of some very potentially concerning advancements when it comes to, I think generative AI is a particularly scary one right now because of how good it's getting at faking or at looking and sounding exactly like the real thing. That one is particularly concerning. I think that we're going to see a lot of it. It's a political year here in the US in terms of the election coming up. So I will not be surprised if that comes up often. I'm curious to see how that's going to play out.
And that's it for this edition of The Current Podcast. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned.
The Current Podcast theme is by Love and Caliber. The Current team includes Kat Vesey and Sydney Cairns.
And remember,
signals don't always grow up to be fully fledged trends.
I'm Damien.
And I'm Elise.
And we'll see you next time. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave us a review. Also, tune into our other podcast, The Current Report.